and the United Nations headquarters in New York. Now, it's never an easy time for Israel at the UN, but this week you could say is particularly challenging. For the first time, a delegate from the State of Palestine was allowed to sit among member states in the General Assembly, even though the U.S. vetoed the Palestinians getting that official status in the Security Council earlier this year. It did pass in the GA. Now, the Palestinians are introducing a series of anti-Israeli resolutions as the UNGA gets underway. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has intensified his criticism of Israel even to new levels, calling the humanitarian situation in Gaza, for example, unprecedented and the worst he's ever seen. Well, joining us now doing his second stint as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations is Danny Danon. And Ambassador Danon, first of all, one has to admire your fortitude in returning there to the UN, especially at this really challenging time there. Maybe just talk us through what we're going to see in the GA, because already we could see the Palestinian Authority gearing up with a whole new raft of these anti-Israel steps.
Thank you for having me, Calev. First, I would mention that I never anticipated that I would come back to the UN. But, you know, after October 7th, we're all doing our best to protect the country we love so much. And here I find myself in this hostile place in the lion's den. And like you mentioned earlier, you know, they're focused, obsessed with Israel. Next week, we're going to have every day a discussion about Israel in the Security Council, in the General Assembly. The Palestinians are conducting diplomatic terrorism against Israel. You know, Hamas are fighting our soldiers in Gaza. The PA representatives are doing the same here in New York. You know, they're wearing suits and ties, but they conduct diplomatic terrorism, spreading lies against our soldiers, blaming us for genocide, calling for embargo and sanctions. We are pushing back, and we are focused now convincing the moral majority not to take part in this circus.
Right, if there is a moral majority there. But I do have to ask you, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, I know in your first stint, despite the fact there were issues between him and Israel, you tried to work productively with him, certainly in certain areas, but he, as I said before, has intensified his criticism of Israel. How would you describe your relationship? How are you trying to work with him? At the same time, he's making these claims about Gaza, and at a time when we, for example, just this week, more reports coming out of UN personnel in Gaza being discovered with links to Hamas and terror organizations.
Calev, I believe in engagement. That's part of diplomacy. You know, I meet hundreds of people every week, and I have a lot of conversations trying to build bridges, to present our stand on major issues. But there are some things that you cannot ignore. And I think Secretary General Guterres made a huge mistake after October 7th when he hinted in his word that you can justify what happened. That's unacceptable. And even now, you know, until today, the UN never officially condemned October 7th. I will not accept it. I cannot accept it. You know, the Security Council met dozens of times. We never heard a condemnation, an official one. The General Assembly will meet next week to pass another empty, hollow resolution coming from the Palestinians, but there was no condemnation of the atrocities of October 7th. I will not accept it. I'm fighting this hypocrisy. I'm going to continue to do that, and I expect the Secretary General, as the leader of this organization, to do something about that. It is unacceptable that after the Holocaust, Jews were murdered and the UN is quiet.
Right. Now, of course, being your position at the UN makes you basically a public figure and representative of Israel in the United States, for sure, but even beyond that on the world stage. And you have to deal with the atmosphere that is not just there at the UN, but that post-October 7th atmosphere that is now in the wider world. To give one example, you had an interview, a quite stormy interview with Sky News, with a presenter there, Bel Donati, who compared what's happening in Gaza to the Holocaust, now reports that she will be seeking work elsewhere about Sky News. Tell us, for example, about that encounter and the follow-up to that. What happened?
So I'm used to tough interviews, and I'm not shy away from tough locations, including Sky News and BBC during the war we are conducting. But there are some lines that I will not allow anyone to cross. When someone makes the equation between the Holocaust and what's happening today in Gaza, that's unacceptable. And during that interview took place in January, I demanded an apology on the spot because she made that equation and it was unacceptable. And she was not willing to admit that mistake even until today. I would give credit to Sky News. They issued immediately an apology, and I accepted that. But that lady refused to do it, and I can congratulate the decision not to extend her agreement with Sky News. I don't think you can call anyone a journalist if you make the equation between what we are doing in Gaza to what the Nazis did during World War II.
Right. Now, as I mentioned, the UNGA has started, and of course, will be going into the next few weeks. And of course, we're going to be seeing in a few weeks the anniversary of October 7th. And of course, how are you gearing up for that there at the UN? And I'm particularly of the concern over the hostages with all the information that's come out, including just in the past couple of days. And of course, the discussions here in Israel about how to see them freed, hostage deal or in whatever other means.
So in every meeting and in every discussion, I bring up the issue of the hostages. I was able to convince, after 11 months, the Security Council to have a meeting about hostages. Can you believe that? It took them 11 months to have a meeting, not a condemnation yet, but only to meet about it. And it wasn't easy. And I want to thank the US, the UK, and France who supported my initiative. It was a very important meeting, and we heard important words from different ambassadors and from a UN representative, believe it or not. But that's not enough. It's only the beginning. We demand a condemnation. We demand actions for the hostages. And every time they bring up the humanitarian cry for the Palestinians in Gaza, I remind them about the humanitarian cry for our hostages. You know, we have seen the horrible pictures coming from the tunnels. One can only imagine what is happening as we speak in those tunnels.
Right. And I do want to ask you about the situation of UNRWA and the debate. And it's really it's gone beyond UNRWA, which is the UN efforts there in Gaza and the discussions about finding some kind of replacement there. But unfortunately, there are still those countries, and that includes most of the Western countries, that still see UNRWA as the address for aid in Gaza. I mean, are there any discussions towards some realistically finding some alternative to that, as Israel would like to see?
Absolutely. I always make the distinction between the bad guys and the good guys. And even at the UN, you can find agencies that we can work with them, WHO, UNICEF. But when you speak about UNRWA, they are not focused on supporting the Palestinians. They focus on incitement and advocacy against Israel. And every time we saw the collaboration with Hamas. So I think it's about time to find another agency to deal with the humanitarian issues. And by the way, you have at the UN, the UNHCR. That's the agency which deals with all the hostages, all the refugees around the world, and they can do the same in Gaza. So we are working with that, and I think more and more countries realizing. We just saw that Switzerland voted a few days ago not to support UNRWA, and we think that is the right direction.
All right, Ambassador Danny Danon, you're kind of like Daniel back in the lion's den, as it were, there in the UN. You had a good tenure the first time around, and we wish you success, continued success there at the United Nations. Thank you for joining us again on I-24 News.
Thank you very much, Calev. Thank you.